Congressman Jim Jordan joins me now. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. All right, so you were in the room at the time. 245 times, Comey, who was the head of the FBI in one of the most important cases in American history, a FISA warrant that was funded by the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton to spy on someone working in the Trump campaign, and that's the least of it, says he doesn't really know or remember that part of it. Did you believe him?
Well, you're right. 245 times he says don't remember, don't recall, and don't know. What was most, I guess, the biggest takeaway for me was the don't know part. Specifically, he didn't know much about Christopher Steele, the guy who they used his work product, the dossier, to go get the warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. He didn't know. He never met Chris Steele. Didn't know the relationship that Christopher Steele had with Bruce Orr, specifically that Christopher Steele was passing information to Bruce Orr, who was then giving it to the FBI. Didn't know that Christopher Steele was terminated for talking to the press. Didn't know he had talked to the press. Didn't know they continued to work with Christopher Steele after he had been terminated and continued to get his information. So I was mostly struck by that. Here's the key player, the guy who put together the dossier that was the basis for getting the warrant, and you didn't know anything about him. I find that hard to believe, but those were his answers yesterday.
Well, you know, clearly he and his lawyer went over all of the areas where he could possibly contradict himself from other hearings, other sworn testimony, from his book, and a number of interviews. But for a case of this significance, when he actually went to the President of the United States to talk about an unverified dossier, so from the time that he heard about it, the time that he approved the warrant in the FBI, and he had to do it, you and I both know it, at least two, if not three or four times. He goes to the president, talks about it, and never says to his staff, gee, where do we get this from? Who's this guy, Christopher Steele? You and I both know from the public information that Christopher Steele was paid by the FBI for other information. He was a confidential informant. I mean, is there any way to get this guy in any kind of jeopardy for perjury and lying?
Well, no, I think you make a good point, because remember, on January 6th of 2017, he goes to New York and briefs President-elect Trump about the salacious and unverified dossier. So he thinks it's important enough to brief the president-elect, but yet he doesn't know anything about the guy who wrote it. Doesn't know that, for example, Christopher Steele told Bruce Orr, who then told the FBI that Christopher Steele had said he was desperate to stop Trump from being president. That was what Bruce Orr conveyed to the FBI. He doesn't know any of that information, but yet he's going to brief the president-elect about this. And as we know, what happened after that meeting on January 6th in New York, it was quickly leaked. CNN and BuzzFeed all then printed the entire dossier for the public to see. So that to me was hard to figure out. Like, how did you not know anything about the guy who was your main source for this whole thing?
It's not only that, Jim. Listen, you know, anybody who has been a prosecutor, who's the head of the FBI, he is a political operative, and I'm going to talk about this in my open in a few minutes. But I guess one is left with, Jim, and this is nothing on you because you fought so hard, but one is left with certain questions like, will the Clintons ever be held accountable? Will Jim Comey, who decided to, and who was insubordinate, according to the Inspector General, by jumping into the Attorney General's shoes and saying, I'm going to exonerate her, no prosecutor would try the woman. Is he ever going to be held accountable? The Clintons. What about the Russia collusion? You guys, with all due respect, to get to this guy now, 2 or 3 weeks before the beginning of the year, I'm embarrassed for you. I really am.
Look, it should have happened a long time ago.
So why didn't it? Jim, why didn't it? You're a fighter.
I know, and we've been pushing for it, and I'll tell you what we're pushing for now, Judge.
Jim, who stopped you?
Ultimately, it's the House leadership and it's the chairman who decide these things. But remember, Judge, what we have to do in the next few weeks is we have to get Rod Rosenstein in front of us. Because remember, it's now been almost 12 weeks since the New York Times reported that Rod Rosenstein said to subordinates in the Justice Department that he was thinking about wearing a wire to record the president and thinking about invoking the 25th Amendment, and we've yet to ask him question 1. So that's the most important thing, in my judgment, over the next 3 weeks before this Congress ends, is to get Rod Rosenstein in, just like James Comey was yesterday, and ask him those questions.
Do it. You guys come on and you talk about it all the time. And Jim, you know I love you, but enough of this nonsense. The American public has had it with you guys.
Trust me, Mark Meadows, Matt Gaetz, and I are pushing to get that done. We are pushing every single day to get that done. But we can't issue the subpoena.
Okay, I said right with Obamacare, Ryan should have been gone, and I took a lot of heat for it, and that was a year and a half ago or whatever it was. All right, this guy doesn't have the president or American people's interest at heart. Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
So, Jim Comey decides that he's going to come out of the meeting with the president, take all these notes, leak them to his friend at Columbia Law School who's a non-government employee. I mean, this sanctimonious, holier-than-thou egomaniac who has to be at the center of everything. He's used to keeping this stuff close to the vest because he's part of and in charge of the deep state, and he's going to get away with it, isn't he?
Well, we'll see. One of the things that did happen yesterday, too, is I asked him that meeting when he had with the president in February, where the president says, could you see your way clear to make sure Mike Flynn is okay? And Comey goes back and he memorializes that, becomes part of the Comey memos. He then has a meeting with his top people, McCabe, Baker, his top people. And I asked him yesterday, I said, why didn't you, if you're so concerned about this, you have to memorialize it. And as you say, Judge, he later leaks it to Daniel Richman in the New York Times. If you're so concerned about what the president said, why didn't you share it with the Attorney General? Why didn't you share it with the top law enforcement individual in our government? And his answer was, oh, well, we thought Jeff Sessions was going to be recusing himself at some point.
So what? He hadn't recused himself at that point.
He had not. And share that information. But I think it points to Comey, the same way he handled the Clinton investigation and took it away from Loretta Lynch. He and his cabal at the FBI, they were the ones in control. They wanted to keep this information tight. He wanted to create a record to promote this idea that there may have been some obstruction. I don't think there was, but I think he was trying to generate and create this and didn't share it with anyone at the Justice Department, the top people in our in law enforcement in our government.
Some sanctimonious, arrogant, condescending individual, and I know him. Not you. Congressman Jim Jordan, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
You bet, Judge.
Thank you.